Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So, some of you may remember Mr. James Fell from a couple of episodes of The Propaganda of Toxic Feminism. He's the so-called fitness guru who has written anti-MRA articles for Time magazine and for his website Body for Wife. And after I exposed one of his articles in an episode of The Propaganda of Toxic Feminism, he tried to find me on the internet. Unfortunately for him, he found the wrong person. He found someone in Queensland called Bane666 and proceeded to make fun of the guy on his Facebook page. Thing is, I've never been to Queensland, so it definitely wasn't me. He's also the guy that really doesn't know what an MRA is. Basically, in his mind, an MRA is anyone who doesn't agree with feminism in exactly the same way that James Fell does. So he's proclaimed in the past that Rush V is actually an MRA. And a lot of people must have started to point out to him that Rush is an anti-MRA. And of course James responded by writing an article in which he claimed that Rush V is now claiming that he's not an MRA because the MRA movement is so toxic or some bullshit like that. Of course, Rush has never claimed to be an MRA, and we can go way back to, I think it was 2010, when he was writing articles about how men should not be involved with the men's rights movement, years before James started writing about us. But, you know, James never lets the facts get in the way of his propaganda, do you, James? In fact, James is really incompetent when it comes to making arguments, and usually resorts to, you know, making either straw man arguments, false associations, or one of his favourite things, shaming tactics. You know, usually referring to us as a bunch of losers or some shit like that. So James had said that he wasn't going to write any more articles about men's rights activists. I think probably because so many people had pointed out so many faults in the articles. But it seems he's written a new one. Someone brought it to my attention that he's written yet another article about the men's rights movement. Now you may be wondering, what serious topic has James taken his time and effort to expose, right? Is he talking about male suicide and how that should be fixed, or the male homeless problem, or maybe he wants to tackle male circumcision? You know, maybe he could talk about how it's a violation of basic human rights and should be outlawed. You know, those serious men's rights talking points that we try to talk about when we're not being shouted down. I wonder which of those serious topics James has taken his time to discuss in this new article. Oh, he's written an article about Urban Dictionary, and apparently we've taken it over, which is news to me. So anyway, let's get into this and see what bullshit James has.
Urban Dictionary is a crowdsourced time waster. A dictionary of internet slang. I've wasted time there myself, offering my own definition. Anyone can post anything and it's likely to be approved, and what gets the most positive upvote versus downvote ratio makes the top definitions. Men's rights activists, MRA, are known for lacking meaningful lives, instead trolling the internet to play the victim and hate on women. Because that somehow helps solve real problems men face. To promote men's rights, they've valiantly taken over the gender equality aspect of Urban Dictionary.
So here's a good example of James basically resorting to shaming tactics. He likes to do this a lot. I guess it's a simplistic argument for a very simplistic mind. And he also likes to just refer to us as trolls, right? So anyone on the internet who says anything which James does not like is, in his definition, by his mind, an MRA. There's no other requirement needed, right? That's it. That's the only definition. So let's continue.
Definitions disparaging MRA or in favor of feminism are often downvoted by the trolls en masse, and likewise multiple definitions they find favorable to their toxic messages are voted to bury any criticism and instead promote a misogynist agenda.
Yeah, and James has hit the nail right on the head here when he says trolls, right? A lot of what he talks about in this article is done by trolls, not by men's rights activists, but by people trolling. Now, of course, James' definition of troll is anyone who says anything against feminism, or his version of feminism. People saying similar things against men's rights activists is perfectly okay. They're not trolls, according to James. And he's about to give us an example of someone who is not a troll, apparently. So let's have a look at this definition. A bunch of whiny, pedantic morons that think there is some vast Illuminati feminist conspiracy while seemingly ignoring the fact that their own gender runs the majority of the world. Yep. Now, remember, folks, that's not a troll comment according to James. That's a legitimate comment according to him, because he's upset that that's no longer number one. In his book, that's perfectly fine being the number one definition of MRA. I mean, because it's so accurate, isn't it? But let's continue.
Now it's number 17, buried on page 3, because the man babies downvoted the shit out of it, and created over a dozen glowingly positive definitions for MRA, then had their whiny buddies upvote them. The top definition for MRA has only a quarter of the upvotes of the one you see above, but very few downvotes. It's the ratio that matters, and it was an active campaign of downvoting that pushed the former number 1 definition to the number 17 spot.
So, he starts off again with shaming tactics, man babies, right? People downvoting a troll definition, which is basically slinging shit at the men's rights movement. That's being a crying man baby, apparently, according to James. And the only people who would do this are MRAs, apparently. Now, I will admit, in the case of the MRA definition, it is most likely to have been voted up or down by men's rights activists. Although I don't think it would be fair to say that exclusively MRAs have voted it up or down. But let's continue.
Here is the new number 1 for MRA, an organization of men and their women allies who draw attention to the ways in which misandry, anti-male attitudes and actions, and gynocentrism, women privileging, harm men.
Yeah, look, that's not a bad definition. It's very short. I guess the only thing I would take issue with, and it's not a major thing, is the term women allies. I think female MRAs are still MRAs, and I'd prefer not to call them allies, because it sounds too much like what feminists do with their male allies. And I think we're far more inclusive of females than a lot of feminists are to their male allies. But let's continue.
What's funny is it admits they're nothing more than trolls. See the words, draw attention? All they ever do is froth at the keyboard with anti-woman rants about how poor off men are. There is no active to their activism.
Well, it's an interesting claim that James makes here, considering all he does is froth at his keyboard with anti-male and anti-MRA rants, which he gets paid for. But James doesn't seem to understand how the world works. You see, if there is an issue like male victims of domestic abuse needing male DV shelters, for example, well, you just don't go and open a shelter overnight because we're a grassroots organisation. We don't have the funds to do that. We're not all millionaires, unfortunately. Trust me, I wish I was a millionaire. But, I'm just a normal guy. So to get funding, to get either private funding or government funding, the first thing you have to do is draw attention to the fucking issue. You have to spread awareness of it. People have to realise that males can be victims of domestic abuse. They have to change their attitude towards those males. They have to have sympathy and empathy towards those males. And then they have to be motivated to actually do something, whether it be donate money themselves or create pressure on the government to actually get off their asses and do something. Because the government's not going to do something without that motivation. And of course, James Fell ignores people like Earl Silverman, who did open a shelter out of his own pocket and ran it for years, and it eventually killed him. But of course, James wouldn't know who Earl Silverman was or what he went through, because James is an ignorant cunt who is incapable of doing any research. He starts with the conclusion and then he warps any evidence to fit that conclusion. And I am doing talking marks around the word evidence. But let's continue.
And the number 2 definition for MRA, a person that believes the radical notion that men have rights to equality, 2. Slandered as misogynists by feminists for suggesting women share equal burden or that rape trials not be witch hunts.
Once again, this definition is extremely short. It could have a little bit more detail, but I don't think it's inaccurate. Let's continue.
Since they brought up feminism, let's see what MRAs have managed to make the number 1 definition for that. A relentless political advocacy group pushing for special privileges for women, which pretends to be a social movement advocating equal rights for the genders. Because women have already achieved more than equal rights, a modern feminist is either an ignoramus or a liar. The definition goes on and on, if you care to read more.
Well, this is a very interesting argument you're making here, James. You're either making the argument that only MRAs can vote on Urban Dictionary, or only MRAs are able to vote for the definition of feminism, right? That's it, according to you. Or, alternatively, maybe, James, you have some CIA connection, or maybe you're a secret hacker or something, and you've actually had access to the logs of Urban Dictionary, and you've checked every single person who voted for feminism, and you've done research on every single one of them and determined that the majority of them are MRAs, as opposed to, just your run-of-the-mill anti-feminist. Of course, the other explanation is, James, that you don't know what a fucking MRA is, and you're just assuming that anyone who disagrees with you is a men's rights activist. Once again, you're a fucking idiot, especially considering this article is about definitions. But let's continue.
MRAs also got this to be the number 1 definition for women, as intelligent as a male of the species though far more vicious. Usually physically inferior yet very easily enraged. Tend to shy away from physical violence, but they gladly practice mental and emotional abuse against both their male counterparts and their so-called sisters.
Okay, James, I would like you to show me the evidence that a single men's rights activist voted for that. Just a single MRA, James. Can you show us the evidence? Of course you can't. This is based on assumptions made by you, which is based on false stereotypes, which is based on your fucking ignorance. Why am I not surprised? But let's continue.
How about the number 1 definition for rape? It's when they aren't kissing you. It takes 2 to tango. And the number 2 definition is an unspeakable act that women like to talk about a lot. The only way to ever be politically correct about rape in any shape or form is to refer to the victim as she, because men are always the perpetrators of said act. Even if you, the male reader of this paragraph, even so much as think of boobs, you are a rapist and always will be. Are you happy, rapist? And the number 4 definition, a fictitious propaganda created by feminists in order to stop all acts of sexual advances by men onto women. There is no such thing.
So, the number 1 is rape. It's when they aren't kissing you. It takes 2 to tango. Yeah, do you think that might have been created by a troll, James? Do you think maybe, just maybe, that was done by a troll and not a men's rights activist. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an MRA who claims that there is no such thing as rape, considering we're advocating for male victims of rape. That would be a little bit of a contradiction, don't you think, mate? But let's continue.
Back to MRA definitions. Here is number 3, a person who believes in the radical notion that men have issues, too. Known for derailing arguments with unfair tactics such as facts or logic.
Yeah, and it's obviously a little bit of a sarcastic comment, but I think it's fairly accurate. Of course, James doesn't like facts or logic. They get in the way of his propaganda. Next.
And it goes on with the glowing definitions until we get to number 17, which I know was at number 1 3 years ago when I first wrote about MRAs for Time magazine. The man babies have been busy since then.
Once again, shaming language. He can't write an article about us without throwing in man babies every second paragraph. And he also loves to point out the fact that he wrote an article for Time magazine. He just fucking loves to point that out. I think if you ever met James in real life, one of the first things he would mention to you is he wrote an article for Time magazine. Next.
By the way, part of the new MRA is to proclaim not being MRA all while spouting a bunch of MRA-esque bullshit. Whatever you label it, it's anti-woman. Here are more examples of how women haters have trialed the upvotes and downvotes on Urban Dictionary to spread misogyny.
So here's the point where James admits that he doesn't know what he's talking about when he's talking about MRAs. So when people point out that what he's talking about isn't actually men's rights activists, he can say, well, they are, but, they just don't say that they are. And this proves to me that James doesn't care about facts. He doesn't care whether his argument is correct or not. His only goal is to shit all over his opposition, and he'll do anything to do that. He'll make up anything. He'll falsely associate them with anything. He'll belittle them in any way he can, because he doesn't care about having a debate or a discussion or finding the truth or understanding his opposition. All he cares about is dragging them down. I would call James a bully, but he's too fucking stupid to be a bully. Now, I don't normally go around calling people idiots. I normally like to focus on the actual arguments and not the person making the arguments, but James is an exceptional case. I find it hard to read one of his articles without pointing out what a complete moron he is. He is just so devoid of any logic or reason or any fucking legitimate argument. And he loves to give himself a big pat in the back while he's doing it. Next.
Number 1 definition for patriarchy, a term used by feminists to blame men for all their problems. And the number 2 definition, the boogeyman that feminists blame for women's problems or underachievements because their big girl pats apparently don't fit. And the number 3 definition, the deity of the 21st century liberal woman. It doesn't exist, but they acknowledge its influence. And the number 4 definition, a non-existent entity used as a scapegoat by women, when there is no other individual to blame other than themselves, as if they'll own up to that.
Okay, I'm going to say some of these definitions aren't too bad. And it is possible that at least one or two of them may have been written by an MRA. I don't know. But that's the point. James doesn't know either. He's just assuming that any definition on Urban Dictionary which goes against his ideology must have been written by one of those evil MRAs, as opposed to, an anti-feminist or a troll or anyone else. Next.
There is a subset of MRA called MGTOW, which stands for Men Going Their Own Way. Basically, it's a group of guys who say they're done with women, then spend a ton of time online talking about women and how allegedly done they are with them. Here is the number 1 definition for MGTOW, Males that choose to control their life on how they see fit and don't take bullshit from women or the corrupt society, since both are filled with evil pricks like feminists. Men who also don't give women money because they know that those bitches will abuse them for the cheddar in their wallet. There isn't a negative definition until number 6.
Okay, a couple of quick things before going on to the next paragraph. Firstly, MGTOW is not a subset of the MRM. Secondly, it is the MRM, James, not MRA. MRA is an individual. MRM is the movement itself. But of course you can't even get our name right, can you? For fuck's sake. Next.
The number 1 definition for alimony is a lengthy diatribe, but starts with a program started in the 1920s to 1930s to support women whose job was to stay home and take care of the kids and run the house. Women were not allowed or encouraged to work, and as so, were unable to support themselves after a divorce. Somehow, the program has continued until this day, since the modern woman is apparently still unable to care for herself, or provide for herself. Big surprise that the same author has the number 1 definition for child support, which is more of the same crap.
Okay, there is some truth in that definition, James. Now, you could have very easily done an article about alimony and the pros and cons and why it might be a good thing or a bad thing. But instead you chose to do an article about fucking Urban Dictionary. Do you see that your priorities might be a little bit off there, mate? Next.
The number 1 definition for misogynist is a commonly used word by feminazis. And under the number 1 definition for misandry, it states, the existence of misandry is often scorned by feminists. See the hypocrisy?
I do see your hypocrisy, James, because you're the type of person that sees misogyny as a real thing but will dismiss misandry. Now, personally, I think they both exist, although feminists often call things misogyny which isn't misogyny. But that's a debate for another time. Next.
We can debate how much this takeover of Urban Dictionary does or does not matter. To me, it's yet one more example of men being assholes to women online. There is no shortage of it, and this doesn't stand out as more egregious than myriad other examples easily found in a quick Google search.
Well, that's interesting, James. Are you telling us that only men can upvote or downvote on Urban Dictionary now? I wasn't aware they brought that in. I'd like to know, James, how you know that these words or these definitions have been up or down voted by males exclusively. I'd also like to know how people leaving definitions or upvoting or downvoting definitions is somehow being assholes to women. You're perfectly okay with the negative MRA definition that you're lamenting isn't at number 1 anymore. That's fine, apparently, in your book. But when people leave comments that you don't like or definitions that you don't like, suddenly you have a piss fit about it. And the real funny thing is, you're the one calling us crying man babies. Leaving a definition that you don't like on Urban Dictionary, mate, is not harassing women online. I hate to tell you that. It's just not. Next.
I prefer to look at the tale this examination tells about MRAs themselves. It reeks of desperation to be heard, in some way, about how they're hurting. I don't write this to offer sympathy, because they're not doing anything to help themselves or help others in similar circumstances. They're just looking for someone to blame.
Wow, a lot of projection here, I think, James. A fucking shit load of projection. And once again, James resorts to shaming tactics. Next.
The hijacking of definitions to promote hatred against women on a site that is meant largely for amusement is a clear indication of what MRAs and their ilk offer society. This is the kind of shit they rally behind. This is where they spend their time and effort, blaming women for their hurt.
Yeah, being concerned about male suicide or trying to stop male circumcision or any of the other issues we talk about is not, we're not doing that because we've been hurt by women, James. We're doing it because there's serious issues that need to be talked about. Second of all, it's not hijacking definitions any more than that first definition that you showed was hijacking definitions. It's open to anyone to leave their definitions. And it's open to anyone to upvote or downvote. And leaving a definition which you disagree with, or upvoting or downvoting a definition, is not hatred towards women, James, any more than the negative MRA or MGTOW definitions are hatred towards men. It's people being trolls or smartasses, usually. I wouldn't refer to it as hatred, though. If there are any women out there who are in tears because the number one definition of MRA on Urban Dictionary is this, then they have very, very serious mental health issues and should seek help immediately and should be kept away from your articles, to be honest, because they're just going to make their condition worse. Next.
They talk about how men have higher suicide rates, but I don't see them promoting volunteering at suicide hotlines. They talk about how men are more likely to be homeless, but I never see them talking about volunteering at shelters. I googled to see if I was missing it, but the returns kept coming back with, missing, MRA. I repeat, there is nothing active about their activism. The negative far outweighs any positive.
So once again, James goes to extreme lengths to show us what a complete moron he is. Once again, I normally don't resort to calling someone a moron, but it's just incredibly hard not to do it with James because he just screams moron. I mean, earlier he was talking about how we're just trolls and all we do is, all we're interested in is being misogynist to women online or some shit, right? Yet here he says that we talk about high male suicide rates and we talk about male homelessness. So it seems that we're not just being dicks to women online, are we, James? It's almost like you've just contradicted yourself here. And then, of course, he talks about doing a search on the internet, and when he's done his search, he's used the term MRA as opposed to something like men's rights. Now, as someone who often does searches on the internet looking for articles to see what people are saying about the men's rights movement, using the term MRA is a very, very bad idea. You don't get good search results, as James has demonstrated here. However, using men's rights in talking marks tends to get a lot better results. This isn't a very difficult thing to work out, right? Anyone with an IQ over, say, 85 probably would have figured it out with a little bit of trial and error. But because James is incapable of even simplistic things, apparently, I did a search for him. It took me all of 30 seconds to find a list of charities for men being promoted by A Voice for Men. I mean, it was extremely hard to find, James. Exceptionally hard. Next.
The takeover is more evidence MRAs are worse than useless. It's a smokescreen to use causes they don't care about to spread a message they do care about. And that message is all about how much they hate women. I can feel sympathy for a hate group.
Then why are you a feminist then, James? If you can't feel sympathy for a hate group, then why do you feel sympathy towards feminism? I mean, every article you write about us is filled with hate and misinformation and lies. But it's interesting that you say that we've taken over Urban Dictionary. That's just ludicrous, mate. It's fucking hilarious. And it's almost as big a joke as you are.